Okay, so we have a today to do Lamed Ham and Beis, but we are in the middle of Lamed Ham and Aleph. We have a lot to do today. So yesterday, just to review again, the Gemara told us that we started out talking about kids and Brachot al Paris. What brachos do we make? Tesis Rabbeinu Yonah pointed out, Tana Heichah, where exactly we're going on. Not 100% clear that we're necessarily going on something specific. Obviously, Masechta is called brachas. Maybe like the Rabbeinu Yonah says, we already talked about brachas of Paris back on Yud Aleph. Maybe that's how we're getting into it now. Maybe like Tesis points out at the top Tesis and the Chaf from the Beis we were discussing about carry what they make brachas on. Either way, we're now in the conversation of discussing the Hilchas brachas, and we said that for Paris you make a ha'ez except for yain. For things that come from the ground you make a hadama except for lechem. And according to Yehuda, it was very specific. He said, Bar Midei Rishon. The Gemara wanted to know that how do we get to a situation where we find out that there is actually a bracha to be made? Where do we know that there's an idea that you have to make brachas? So that in order to be able to learn this out, you can I get a chumash, please? It would be you need to understand that there's a machlokes in Parshas Kedoshim about whether or not the Torah is talking about Neter Ravai or Keren Ravai. Thank you so much. If you look in Parshas Kedoshim, the pasuk, as a matter of Parsha Pshat, would seem to be super clear that we are dealing with Neter Ravai. The pasuk tells us that Ki Tavoy al Haaretz, when you come into the land of Israel, and Tatam Kol Eitz Ma'afal, you will plant any tree. Ba'araltem arlosei es piryoi. You'll have the fruit of the tree be arla. Shaloshanim yelachem arelim lo yachal. So you can't eat it for 3 years. V'ashana revius yeh kol piryoi. Then in the 4th year, all the fruit of the tree will be kodesh hilulim laHashem. Will be kodesh to God. V'ashana chamishes. And then the 5th terflos piryos of them tzvos and Hashem alikeichem. Then in the 5th year, you'll be able to eat the fruit. No problem. I am your God. So the pasuk said, "Unatatem koletz ma'achal." It will be any tree, which sounds like any tree is going to have these halakas. However, there is a machlokes about this. There is a man that Amar holds karamavai. We're not getting into more than this now. Suffice to say, if you look at Tesis here, and also Tesis beginning Kedushin on Gimel and Beis, you look at the side of the Gemara says, look carefully at the Tesis Kedushin Gimel and Beis. It seems to be you could dispute about whether or not karamavai or neter ravai is going to be argued on. And is it just on a deraisa level? Is it also on a derabbanan level? We'll put that on the side for the moment. And just to focus on one point, if the pasuk is very clearly talking about kol eitz ma'achal, then how do we say that this is talking about karam ravai and not talking about neter ravai, which would be a simple reading? So the answer to that is that if you look at the pasuk says to us, "Vashana haravius yeh kol pirya kodesh hilum Hashem." There's a connection here between Tavua and these trees. What is the connection between Tavua and trees? It wouldn't necessarily seem like the same words to be putting in. If you look in Parshas Kiseitze, the pasuk tells us in Parshas Kiseitze the mitzvah of Kilayim, and over there we learn out the following. The pasuk tells us that right, you're not allowed to plant kilayim in your vineyard. So the Torah here is saying about the Isra of kilayim, and it's talking about kilayim kerem, and the Torah says usvuas hakarem. The Torah uses the word tavua when it's talking about a vineyard. So the assumption is, according to the Man Amar, holds that we're talking here about Kerem Ravai and not Neter Ravai, meaning it's much more limited in terms of what the Isser is, right? Kerem Ravai, not Neter Ravai. He's learning it out from the fact that it says the word Tavua here by Kerem and the word Tavua here, which will then say it's also talking about Kerem. So if it's specifically talking about Kerem, then the issue that we're dealing with of Neter Ravai is going to be more limited. It's only going to be dealing with Kerem Ravai. This is fundamental to understanding our Gemara here that we started on yesterday. So again, vineyard. So it says the Gemara. It says the Gemara. Minani Mila. We're going to start again more quickly. Minani, how do you know this? The Tana Rabbanim, because we learned Kodesh Hilulim Lashem. The pasuk told us by Neter Ravai that something should be Kodesh. How do you know they have to say a bracha? Because the Torah is telling us that in the fourth year the fruit will be Kodesh Hilulim Lashem. The fruit will be holy Hilul, which is Hallel, which is praise to Hashem. That teaches us that you need a bracha before and afterwards. In what sense do you need a bracha before and afterwards? Because it says Hallel. Hallel is mashma, a bracha is mashma praise, and therefore, since it's mashma praise, we're going to say that that praise is equated to a bracha. Therefore, Rabbi Kiva learned out from here that it's forbidden for a person to eat anything, to taste anything without making a blessing. You have to make a blessing because you see that these fruit are supposed to have hilul. They're supposed to have halal. You're supposed to be praising these fruit. How do you praise them? You praise them by making a bracha. So says the Markanam Kiva so abshidin klum kam shiver by kaddish shilum lahachi the asa fraktymar. Is that what this kaddish shilum Hashem is coming to teach you? So the Gemara asks 1 second. I don't understand what you're talking about. You're saying Kaddish Shilum Hashem is here to teach you the Hilchas Brachos? It's not. It's here to teach you that, number one, when you want to eat these fruit, right, you want to be eating these fruit in wherever you are, in Tzfas. You don't want to be taking these fruit down to Yerushalayim. So what do? You have to be paid to them. You take some money, you take the Kedusha, put it on the money, and then you can eat the fruit here. And eventually you'll spend the money in Yerushalayim. So we're learning out the idea of Hilul here, not that it's praising Hashem, but Hilul as relates to Chilul. That is to say, you have to be mechalel the fruit in order to make them not Kaddish, in order to be able to eat them. That's one limud that we want to have from this. Achle, it's a cute play on words, right? Achle, first make it chulin, v'hadar achle, and then you could eat it. V'idach, and the other thing that we learned from Kaddish Hilul Hashem is davar hato'en shira to'en chilul. Where do we say that there is a requirement to make to have this idea of the fourth year? Where does this apply? It applies by something that requires shira. What requires shira? That we're going to say requires chilul. But what is that thing? That will be wine. Wine is the only thing that has shira associated with it. Now, Taisus points out, don't think that that means that there's no shira in the Beis Hamikdash. That's not true. Obviously, the Levium said shira about a lot of things. But about the Mizbeach, says Taisus, about things that were utilized by the Mizbeach, it says, Ein Aimim Shir al Shum Achilas Mizbeach. Anything that was related to the Mizbeach didn't have shir. You're going to Zrikas Saddam and Isachamayim. It was just Yayin that has shira. Of course, there was shira aside from things that were eaten on the Mizbeach. But with regards to things that were eaten on the Mizbeach, the only thing that has shira is Yayin. Only the Nisach Hayayin gets specific shira, nothing else. So therefore, the Gemara at this stage is saying, we have a pasuk Kaddish Hilul Hashem. According to the Mandamar holds that the pasuk is talking about Neta Ravai, which was the simple reading of the psukim, because it says the pasuk tells us Patam Kol Eitz Ma'achol. So you assume the whole parsha is talking about Neta Ravai. So then Kaddish Hilul Hashem is extra. While it's true that you still have to learn out Achle v'hadar Achle, you still have to learn out the idea that you have to make something chol, there will still be at least one hilul available. Hilulim is plural. Hilulim. So one you're going to say is going to be used for achle v'hadar achle, but the second will be available, and the second halul will be used to teach you that you have a chiyuv to make a bracha. However, according to Man the Amar, that's not learning out merely achle v'hadar achle, but they're also learning out the idea that something that is ton shira is ton chilul, meaning that it's only going to be applying by kerem revai, not by net revai, because it's only things that require halal I'm sorry, it's the only things that require Shira require Chilul, right? What is that? Only Kerem, not any other Elon, not anything else. So then both of the Hiluls are being used to teach you a halacha, and there will be no Hilul available to teach you the halacha of making a bracha. That's the Gemara until here. So the Gemara says, we got to this yesterday, right? Where the pasuk there in Shoftim is telling us that Avimelech's brother Yosam, who after Avimelech has killed out 70 of his brothers, right? He's the last one left. So he's telling the people of Shechem, like you're all going with my brother Avimelech. He's a murderer. My half brother Avimelech, he's a murderer who's killed out everybody, and you're going to go with him. It's like, you know what the example is? It's like, the trees were looking for a leader, so they went to the olive tree, and they went to the wine, and they went to all the different ones, and everybody's like, no, it's not for me, it's not for me. And they went to the thorn bush, and the thorn bush is like, okay. Like you went to the worst of the worst, and you made him your leader. Anyhow, that's the context of the pasuk. But the pasuk shot here of what we're saying is that in his speech, what did he say? The wine, when he was saying, I don't want to be the leader, he said, "Echdaltis tiraishi." Is like, am I giving up on producing my wine? I'm samech alakim v'anashin, that makes God and man happy. In other words, I'm fine with what I have. I don't need anything more than this. So the Gemara is focusing on this idea that wine makes God and man happy. I understand that it makes man happy. I understand that it makes man happy to drink. But how does it make Hashem happy? What does wine have to do with Hashem being happy? From here we learn out, from here we learn out that you only have Shira on wine. That's what we already pointed out. This is all part now of this larger question. And this larger question is, according to my Amr holds Neta Ravai, Kodesh Shilul Hashem can teach you two things. One, Achle V'Hadar Achle, and two, it'll teach you the Hilchas Brachas. However, according to my Amr that holds that you're learning out from Kodesh Shilul Hashem, that you're dealing with Kerem Ravai, and not Neta Ravai, because he's going to learn out Achle V'Hadar Achle, and he's going to learn out Davar Torah and Shir Torah and Chilul, so then you don't have any room left for Brachas. Good? Clear? So at this stage of the Gemara, we don't have an answer to explain that Manda Amar. So says the Gemara, I think this is what we got yesterday. It makes sense according to Manda Amar holds Neta Ravai, how you have the learning out Hilchos of Brachas and Mekanam Rebbe Kiva Salon Shigitam Klum Kodem Shevar. We understand that because you had one extra Hallel. So says the Gemara, but according to Mandar Melamanda Tani, Karam Ravai, Michael Maymar, but according to Mandar holds Karam Ravai, what are you gonna say? Right, because he's gonna be stuck. De Itmar, because we know, but this is a machlekes between Reb Chia, Reb Shimon, Rabbi Chad Tani, Karam Ravai, Chad Tani, Nat Ravai, right? The machlekes between Reb Chia and the son of Rabbi about whether or not the Pesukim are dealing with Karam Ravai and Nat Ravai. Ulamad the Tani Karam Ravai, and according to my number holds Karam Ravai. So Lumar wants to say, I have an answer. I have a way to say that the Hilo will also be extra according to that Mandamar. What's the way that it'll be extra? The way so the more says as follows. Lumad the Tani Karam Ravai, the way it will be extra is as follows. Because it's a possibility to learn out the idea that it's Karam Ravai from a Gzer Shava. That means that the hilulim then one will be used for achle v'hadar achle. That is to say, first you have to machal the pears in order to be able to eat them outside of Yerushalayim. But the second one, which you thought maybe that's going to be telling you davar tar shir tar and chilo to teach you to about kerem, is not going to have to do that. Why not? Because we will have this from a gezer shava. Says the Gemara, "Ulman tani kerem revai." This will work out well if you learn out from Gzer Shav the Tanya, because we have a brayser of Rabbi Omer. Right, one pasuk tells us here by the Revai. The pasuk told us of Ashana Chamishis Teifles Period. They use the word Tevua here, and we have another place where it says Tevua. That is in the parsha of Bikurim later on, and in Devarim, the pasuk tells us Um, the pasuk tells us, where was the pasuk? The pasuk tells us in the parsha of Kalayim, the pasuk tells us, "Tizru chakarman kol Kalayim, pantik desham le'azer asher tizru svuas hakarim." So over there, the pasuk told us also tivuas hakarim. So we see the word tivua used by karim and tivua used by the pasuk here about Revai. So we're going to say that in our parsha here, in Parshas Kedoshim, it's talking not about Net Revai, but about Kerem Vai. And how do we know that? We know that from the Gzer Shava that we're learning out from the Parsha of Kilayim. So then we're going to end up in a situation where the Hilul will be extra. You don't need that extra Hilul to teach you Dovra Ton, Shira Ton, Hilul, right? Because you already know this out from the Gzer Shava from Kilayim, which can then be extrapolated to us. Because if in Parshas Kedoshim where it talks about Ravai, it's talking about a Kerem. And if in Parshas Kisesa we're talking about Kilayim, it's talking about a Kerem. So then I already know the halacha about Kerem. And what I need to now know is what do I do with the extra Hilul? So I use that to teach you brachas. Says the Gemara, Ulamanda Tony Karen Ravai Honey Chayav Zer Shav. Tani Rabbi Yom Nemer Kan Lo Sitchem Tavos and Amal Halon Swasa Karen Mal Halon Karen Mavkan Karen. So then Iyater Le Chad Hilul LeBracha. So I have one extra Hilul, which will then come and teach me the hilchos of brachas that I have to make a bracha when I eat something. So it says in 1 second. Bavi Lo Yol Gzer Shava Bracha Minale. But if you don't learn the Gzer Shava, if you don't end up learning the Gzer Shava from Kilayim, so the Tvua is not being learned now, so then how do you know the bracha? Because you're still going to be reliant on the Hilulim, right, to teach you Davar Ton, Shira Ton, Chilol. So says the Gemara, V'inami Yol Gzer Shava, and even if you do learn the Gzer Shava, meaning according to the Manda Amar holds, Karam Ravai is not learned out of the extra Hilul to teach you Davar Ton, Shira Ton, Chilol, but rather it's being learned out that it's talking about Karam Ravai from Kilayim, from the Gzer Shav of Tvua. So then, according to that Manda Amar, we have a situation where we only know the bracha afterwards. And as Rabbeinu Chananel points out, that's not just a question. This Gemara is not just a question according to that Manda Amar, but it's also a question on the Manda Amar holds Neta Ravai. Because according to the Manda Amar holds Neta Ravai, you have one Hillel that has to teach you Achle V'Hadar Achle, and the second Hillel is to teach you a bracha. So great, but that's only going to teach you one bracha. Presumably the bracha afterwards. That it was one parsha in Akev, but if we needed to teach you brachas, then we have it over here as well. At this stage of the Gemara, there is a machlekes we share on whether or not we understood this bracha as being a limud de'arais or just an asmachta. We're going to assume for our purposes now, like it was just an asmachta. The Torah says maybe they thought it was de'arais at the beginning. Rabbeinu doesn't seem to suggest that. So at this stage of the Gemara is now asking a question on both. According to Manda Amar holds Karam Ravai learned out of the Gzer Shava, and according to the Neta Ravai, you're still not out of the woods. You're only learning out the bracha afterwards, because if there's only one hill available, it's teaching you a bracha, so we'll learn out that that's presumably the bracha after you ate. But you have to make a bracha before you ate. And we're saying, Kates and Mavarchan ala Paris. Question is, what do you make a bracha before? So how do you know? So says the Gemara, if you don't have the Gzer Shava, then again, you're stuck, you don't have brachas. Even if according to the Amar who holds Karamavite, you learn from the Gzer Shava, and according to the Amar, like the Rebbeinu Chananel says, you learn out Neter Ravai, so in which case you have one extra to teach you brachas, but either way, you don't have a bracha beforehand. Ashkel and Ashkel, the fun of Minayin, but you don't have a bracha beforehand, says the Mahalai Kash, that's not a question. The Asya, Bekavach, Geshu, Savem, Mever, Geshu, Rav, like Kolshgain. We're going to learn that from a bracha. If somebody has to make a blessing after he's full, so then when he's hungry, for sure he's going to have to make a bracha. Again, as Taisus points out over here, what kind of a kavachaymer is this? Taisus says, "Lav kavachaymer the in Cain to hey bracha l'fanav midaraisa." If this is a real kavachaymer, and the bracha ahead of it, the bracha beforehand will be daraisa because you learn something out of a kavachaymer, it should have the same din as what you learn afterwards. Again, as I said, it sounds like from Taisus maybe this whole Gemara was at this stage thinking it was the Doraisa. Rabbeinu Chanal doesn't seem to suggest that. Neither does Rabbeinu Yonah. They understand that the Kal V'Chomer would just be, sort of rabbinic. Again, as we'll see, we'll get later on to what the actual source is. But at this stage of the Gemara wants to say, according to the Man Amar holds Netter Ravai, and according to the Man Amar who holds Kerem Ravai, that is learned out of Gzer Shava. So according to them, you will be able to learn out the bracha before you eat mitzad Kal V'Chomer. If after you eat, when you're full, you have to make a bracha. So for sure, when you're hungry, you should have to make a bracha. That's the Gemara at this stage. So says the Gemara, okay. So we're in a stage where we have essentially three permutations or three possibilities. You have the Madam holds Natar Ravai, who has one hilul available for bracha. For the bracha afterwards, it's true, but for the bracha before, we'll learn out from a Kal V'Chomer. We have the Madam holds Kerem Ravai, which he learns out from Gzer Shava. So again, we have one hilul extra. So again, the same thing applies. It teaches us the bracha after the Kal V'Chomer for the bracha before. And then we have the third possibility, which is the Madam holds Kerem Ravai, but it doesn't help from Gzer Shava. So the only way he knows Kerem Ravai is from hilul. So in which case, he doesn't have the ability to learn bracha at all. Good? That's the three possibilities of the Gemara until now. So says the Gemara, fine. We're going to give up on the Man Amar who holds Kerem Ravai, no Gzer Shava, because he doesn't get bracha. Can't find it. So we're going to have to use the Gzer Shava to teach you. But says the Gemara, but what about any other food item? Ashkechan Kerem Shar Mina Minayin. How do you know any other brachas will be required? It's only talking about Kerem. According to Manamar Ravai, at least you have a lot of trees, a lot of different fruits. But according to Manamar, it's Kerem Ravai. Then how do you know any other brachas will be required at all? So says the Gemara, Ashkan Kerem Shar Mina Minayin. Says the Gemara, the Yalef Mi Kerem. We learned that out of Kerem. What do you mean? Says the Gemara, Kerem Davashin Nenav bracha, just like a Kerem. It's something you have out of, and it requires a bracha. Safko Davashin Nenav bracha. So to anything else you have hana out of also requires a bracha. So it's sort of like simple, right? It's a simple idea that we can learn out a limud from Kerem. It's just a nice thing and that people enjoy, and they have to make a bracha. So anything that you enjoy, you should make brachas on. Says Ma, really? It's like just so simple? Not so simple. You can ask a question on this. What's the question? There's a chumrah in Kerem that doesn't have existence in other types of food items, namely that you're chayiv in oilus. It's a tzad chumrah of a Kerem that on very, very small, immature amounts of grapes, you still have to leave that over for the poor. It's a specific din by a Kerem. So the Gemara says, kama teichiach. Well, bread, or kama is the kama alumasa v'gam nitzava, like the sheaves of wheat. So the more talking about bread. So bread is going to be teichiach you. It's going to teach you. What do you mean? Malakama, just like by bread, what do we see? Shekain. So sorry, the Gemara says that we're going to learn for bread. Bread is what a davar that you have hana from, and you have to make a bracha out of. So to anything else that you have hana from, you have to make a bracha on as well. The Gemara says, really? But there's a specific chumrah by challah that doesn't have by bread. It doesn't have by other food items. Malakama shekain chayav b'challah. By when you want to eat dough, you have to take off challah. That's something very specific to wheat. It's not applicable to other food items. It has a tzad chumrah. So how could you say that anything you ever know out of, you should make a bracha? Maybe only food items that have very specific halakas associated with giving things to the poor and the like. They have specific chumras, so they require brachas. But who says that that's true with regards to things that don't have these kinds of chumras? So it says the more kerem yechiach. On that, you can say, well, learn out of Kerem, because Kerem is not chayiv in Chal, it's only chayiv in Oilos. So the Moshe says, 1 second. The Chazer adin le'rosek rezev le'zek because kiroi. Zeh tzad shosher ben davashin atam bracha. I've called davashin atam bracha. So the Moshe says, yeah, but you have tzad shava, right? The bread is not chayiv in Oilos. The Kerem is not chayiv in Chala. So the each are things that are dissimilar from one another. Each have chumash that the other one doesn't have. We see that they're still chayiv in making brachas. Now, how do you know that bread is chayiv making a bracha? I didn't mention this point. I should have mentioned it. Because if you go to the pasuk in Parshas Ekev, the pasuk there, which is dealing with v'achalta savata v'rachta, the pasuk says that the pasuk specifically says Eretz Hid l'serv gave instead of human Eretz says Shem V'Zvosh Eretz Ashalom Niskenos Toicha Ba Lechem Loisech Sarkol Ba. And what's the very next pasuk? V'Achalta V'Savato Ve'Rachta. So you see that there is a bracha associated by bread. The pasuk is telling you that Eretz Ashalom Niskenos Toicha Ba Lechem Loisech Sarkol Ba V'Achalta V'Savato Ve'Rachta. So we see, as Rashi points out, the association of making a bracha with bread. Since the association of making a bracha is with bread, and bread, we're going to say it has maybe a tzad chumrah, which requires challah, but nevertheless, since karam, which also has a requirement to make a bracha by, because we're talking about this, this hilulim, that it has a special limud that it has to make a bracha. So even though it has a tzad chumrah of oilus, put the two together. Each one has a tzad chumrah the other one doesn't have. And so therefore it should be limud now to all other things. All other food items should all require a bracha. This is the Gemara as it is right now. The Gemara says, really? This is a nice limud, but there's a problem. The problem is, there's a tzad mizbeach that exists by these food items that doesn't exist by other food items. In other words, what do you do with the flour, right? You put it as a karban mincha. What do you do with a wine? You have yayin. You have nisach hayayin. These things go on the mizbeach. So they have a tzad chomer, not that one doesn't have, the other one doesn't have. They have a tzad chomer that is similar in both. That they each have a tzad mizbeach. And guess what? Most food items do not. So therefore, that's why we say that they require brachas. But anything else, I shouldn't be able to learn out of that. There's no more the osi nami zayis is b'tzad. We should learn out also zayis from here, because zayis also has a tzad mizbeach. What do you mean zayis has a tzad mizbeach? Oil you put on the mizbeach, all the karbanas with the mincha, etc. So therefore, you should also learn out zayis from this. Zayis also has a tzad mizbeach, so it should also be having a bracha in it. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Says the Gemara, I don't need you to teach me that a zayis has a tzad mizbeach. I know zayis is called a kerem. The Torah itself calls zayis a kerem. The sivayav migosh kama the ad kerem zayis. See, by this pasuk is again in Shoftim by Shimshon Agibor. He was one of his battles against the Pelishtim. He caught a bunch of foxes. You remember that? And what did he do? He tied their tails with fire. And then he had them run around, and it caused huge problems for the Pelishtim. But if you look at the pasuk, v'yav migadosh v'ad kama, so it burned down migadosh v'ad kama v'ad karam zayis. Now the pasuk shad is like a Talmud. Yonason says over there, which is it burned down the karam and the zayis, two separate trees. But the way the pasuk is written, it doesn't say v'ad zayis, v'ad karam zayis. So it puts zayis and karam together. So you see, you call zayis karam, in which case whatever applies to a karam will apply to a zayis. So therefore, I don't need to have a limud from the fact that it has a tzad mizbeach, since zayis is also called a karam. It will also have the halakas of brachas associated with it. So the Gemara rejects this idea that zayis is straight out because it says the pasuk karam zayis. Again, it could have done it by saying that it's not pshat, it's not how to read the pasuk, but it doesn't do it that way. The Gemara says amar papa karam zayis ikri karam stam malay ikri. No, the only thing we're learning out that will have a bracha is only a karam. A zayis is not called a karam. Over here, it's called a karam zayis. So we're not going to be able to learn out of that. So therefore, the only way you will know zayis is from the fact that you have this sort of a mamatzinu, which has a tzad mizbeach, will also include zayis, because it also has a tzad mizbeach. So all things that have a tzad mizbeach will require a bracha. In which case, we, as the Gemara concludes, mikol makom kasha. Nevertheless, we still have a question. Malas hadashav sheben sheken yesh behen tzad mizbeach. Nevertheless, how do we know here with the tzad hashava that we have that it's going to teach you anything else? Because all these things have a tzad mizbeach, kerem, kama, zayis. But how will it teach you anything else? The Gemara says, El diofla mishivas hamina. According to this man, the Amr, it's Kerem Ravai, who has attempted to teach us that maybe we know brachas in other types of food items from the sort of a mamatzinu. It doesn't work. it fails because only things that have a tamizbech will know that we are requiring a bracha. Anything that doesn't have a tamizbech, we won't know that it requires a bracha. And so we end up in a situation that we don't have a limit for anything else. So what do we have to learn out of? We have to go back to Shivas Haminin. Go back to the pasuk in Parashas Eikev, which we said taught us lechem. The pasuk right before where it says Leisechsabah, Eretz Hashalim Miskenos Techabol Lech, and the pasuk literally right before that says Eretz Chidas Erev Gefen Eino of Rimain, Eretz Shem Dvash. The next pasuk says Eretz Hashalim Miskenos Techabol Lech L'Sechsa Kalpa, and the next pasuk says V'chadas Savad V'Rakta. So if you go to the pasuk before, it talks about the Shivas Haminim, and V'chadas Savad V'Rakta talks about the Shivas Haminim. So you see, a bracha is required by all Shivas Haminim. So now forget everything we learned according to the Amar of Kareb Revai. How are you going to know that there is a halacha of brachas by food items? You know from the Shivas Haminim. The Shivas Haminim is what teaches it to you. Says the Gemara. El Diachol Shivas Haminim. My Shivas Haminim says the Gemara. Davar Shenoi Shenen Eviton Bracha. I've called Davar Shenen Eviton Bracha. The Gemara says, great. So teach you to everything else. Anything that has a na, like Shivas Haminim, will be requiring a bracha as well. It says the Gemara. 1 second. Mal Shivas Haminim Shekin Chayavim Bikurim. That's only going to work to teach you things that would be required in Bikurim, because that's a tzad chumrah. But things that are not required in Bikurim, how do you know? And that only teaches you after you make a bracha. We still don't know about making a bracha beforehand, right? So the Gemara says, well, halay kasha, making a bracha beforehand is not a problem because us the kavachaymer because we always have an answer for that. We gave before, which is once you're making a bracha when you're full, for sure you have to make a bracha when you're hungry. So the Gemara at this stage is now not sure. Now, according to Man Amar holds Karen Ravai, he's stuck because he tried with his mamatzino, that didn't work. So now we're trying to say learn from Shivas Hamin, and that's not working because those are all required in Bikum. So that's a tzad chumah that other food items don't have. But the Gemara says, okay. But before we finish and letting, holding him off in symbol, what about the Mandamar Netarevai? According to Mandamar Netarevai, that's only talking about Ilonais. What about Paris that are not from the Elon? What about Paris Haaretz? What about things that are not growing from the earth at all, like fish or like meat? How do you need bracha on anything? Says the Gemara, Mandamar Netarevai, Hatena Kodava Netia. The Lav Manatia, Gambasar Beitim Vidogim Minole. So you don't have an answer for him about brachas. So now you're stuck on both. As the Gemara Elasfarahu, you know what the answer is? After all this, back and forth, the simple answer is it's a svara. And svara is very important. We don't have time now, but svara is our daraisa sometimes. So what is a svara? It's us for a person to have hana from this world out of bracha. That is ultimately the limit, and that's going to work both according to Kamravai and Netarvai. So what we get from this Gemara, the fundamental idea that it's learning for the sake of learning. This is not such an easy Gemara, and nevertheless, it's absolutely key to understand that, to be able to understand how the Teresh Val Peh works. This is a classic example of it. We're not going to throw out this whole Gemara because we don't pass like any of it. No, it's exactly what we learn out so many other things along the way, and you get tremendous amount of scholars for going through the whole back and forth. Says the Gemara, it's also for a person to have hana from this world without a blessing. Anybody who has hana from this world without a bracha is like he's doing me'ila maita kante. What is the way to remedy, to rectify it? Right? Easy Gemara now. So it's a chacham. He should go to a wise man. It's a chacham. My avilay. What does it mean? Going to a wise man. I'm going to the top of chacham. What does it help? You go visit rabbis to get the Gan Eden? No, that's not how it works. So what's the answer? So the more hayavale isura, the guy's doing a bad thing. So how's it going to help him to go to a chacham? Go first to rabbis before you have to eat. Meaning, go learn. Let's go and learn all the hilchos brachos. So you should be able to avoid eating something without thanking Hashem properly. Anybody who is having enough from without a blessing, it's as though he's having hana from Kachei Shemayim, again, inappropriate. Because the world belongs to God. It sounds like there's a stira. On the one hand, it sounds like the heavens belong to God and the earth belongs to man. On the other hand, it sounds like the whole earth belongs to Hashem. So which one is it? And the Gemara, like Kasha Kan Kan Bracha, we turn the page to Lamed Hey Amud Beis, and Kan La'ach Bracha. One is with regard to after a blessing. Meaning, before blessing, the whole earth belongs to Hashem, and after blessing, you make it your own, and then you're able to have something from it. I'm talking about Papa. Anybody who has Hanav without a blessing, it's like he's stealing from Hashem and the Jewish people. It's like a pasuk there, Mishlei. Somebody who steals from his parents. Passion. He says, "There's no problem, there's no sin in me." So what is he? He's a buddy to a destroyer. What do you mean he's a buddy to destroy? So the more now explains the pasuk. What does mean? Gezel aviv means Hashem. Shnemer haloi hu avicha kanecha. Ve'ein email knesset Yisrael. You know who the mother is? The mother is the Jewish people. Shnemer shema b'nim musar v'chatesh teres yemecha. My chavru leishmashkas. Who's he? Meaning somebody who steals from his parents. He is, and he says, "There's no sin in me." He's a buddy to the destroyer. Who's the destroyer? I'm talking about Papa Chavru Rav Menavat. He's a buddy to Rav Menavat who destroyed the Jewish people. Why did he destroy the Jewish people? Because Rav Menavat put up a mizbeach in Dan and in Beisel, and he prevented the Jewish people from going to Beisel. Says the Gemara about Papa Rami. Here, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but this is an absolute fundamental Gemara. Says the Gemara about Papa. We just mentioned him. So now I mention another pasuk, another limit from him. He says, "Lokach going to be itai." Pasuk says in Isaiah that Hashem says, "I'm going to collect the grain in its time," meaning you're not going to get the Jewish people. Why? Because they were sinning. And yet we say in Mahim Shabbat that we're going to collect the grain. So what does he mean? Who's collecting the grain? Are we collecting the grain, or is Hashem collecting the grain? The difference is when the Jewish people are doing God's will and when they're not doing God's will. If they're doing God's will, then they are able to collect the grain on their own. When they're not doing God's will, then Hashem collects the grain. Tanur Rabbanan says the Gemara, we have a price of Safta. We're going to collect the grain. Why do I need to teach you that you're going to collect the grain? Obviously, when you plant, you collect the grain. What do you need to teach you that? Because the pasuk says in the beginning of Yeshua, the Torah says you may not abandon the Torah from your mouth. So Yachod Devarim Kirsav, and you would think that maybe literally means you cannot abandon the Torah from your mouth, meaning you always have to learn at every moment. That's what it means in Pasuk. The Pasuk tells you that you collect the grain. Hanning behind the minig derech eretz divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says that means that you should be doing the normative derech eretz, meaning you collect the grain. You might think that Lo Yom Shefer Derech Zaber would prevent you from doing that. No, it doesn't prevent you from doing that. You will act normally and appropriately, which would mean collect your own grain. No, how's that possible? Is it possible for anybody to do charisha and zeria and all the different things of wooding, threshing, planting, plowing, etc., and still learn Torah Mateo? That's possible to learn. So when the Jewish people are doing God's will, then their work will be done by others. Because the Zarm, the strangers, will come and they will shepherd your sheep. They'll take care of all the things you need to take care of. And when the Jewish people don't do God's will, then their work will be done by others. And not only that, but rather, not only will they have to do their own work, but also the work of others they'll have to do. The work for the enemies. Abai says that many people try to do like Rabbi Shmuel, and it worked for them, and did not work for them. That is to say, according to Abaya, many people tried to do what Rabbi Shimon Chai suggested and just learn, and it did not work. But people tried like Rabbi Shmuel, and it did work for them. Rabbi says to Rabbanan, I beg of you, please, in the days of Nisan and Tishrei, do not come before me, so that you shouldn't be focusing on your thinking about your poverty the whole year. In other words, the Yom Nisan and Yom Tishrei, even though normally we said that that's the Shabbat, the Yarchei Kala, people come to learn. I don't really understand how that worked, but he says in those months, or the plowing months, the harvesting months, don't be seen by me, don't be in my Spanish, go home and work in order to be able to make a parnasa for your family. We don't have a lot of time, but we have to mention a couple of things. We don't have time to do it again tomorrow. The Steward of the Gemara Menachasadi test, the basic Gemara there tells us mashma the opposite. Rishmael says when Ben Dama asked him when he could learn Greek philosophy, he says no, the time it's not day or not night. Why? Because it says Lo Yom Sheber Torah Zemipicha. And Shebei Chai says the person who says Shema in the beginning and the evening, in the morning and the evening, is Kayim Behen in the midst of Lo Yomish. That sounds like an absolute stira. So the simple way to manage that stira is to just say you have to change the gears. Make Rabbi Shmuel over there, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and vice versa. That could be. You could also potentially answer that has to do with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai before, after they came out of the Ma'or, more Shabbos Lamed Gimel. Maybe that's a possibility as well. But after it comes out of the after it comes out of the cave, the first time he's burning up everybody we sees, and then he has to go back in for another year, and then he comes out of the cave again. The second time he has different positions, and Rabbi Shimon doesn't, but Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai then is more calm around people who are living in this world. That could be another possibility. But fundamentally, forget that Gemara there, Menachos Study Test. Just focusing on this Gemara over here. Is this Gemara over here telling us Vasavta Ganecha? Right, this is the fundamental point. Vasavta Ganecha, which we say every single day in the Shema, and we put it in our tefillin, we put it in our mezuzah, we put it everywhere else. Is that going to be Pasha Pshat to say that that's talking about a situation where it's not Oisem and Sunnah Shamakim? It's Lo Ya'al Das. Impossible to imagine that this is the thing that we say every single day. This is the Shema, and that's in a situation of not Oisem and Sunnah Shamakim. So the answer to try to answer this thesis, the Marshal, the average, a lot of people try to answer and say, well, it doesn't mean that they're doing bad stuff. It just means that it's not as good as it could be. So think of it as three levels. There's Ein Kolkas, and then Ein. And what this is basically saying is that it's this intermediate category where you're doing Hashem's will, but not as good as it could be. That would be the only possible way to answer. Nevertheless, it's not so simple. All right, have a wonderful day.